What is going on, guys and gals? Brooklyn bound the Raid Scientist here, and today we have the full immersive guide to King's Fall 2.0 Raid launched in Destiny 2. Today we're going to cover all of the encounters, recommended loadouts, subclasses, hidden chests, and more in order to give you all the details you need to be successful in taking on the Taken King himself. This guide's going to cover all the details even if you're new to the raid and have never run it in Destiny 1 all those years ago. Now there's a lot to cover on each encounter. Feel free to use the timestamps in the description to skip to whichever encounter you'd like. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. When you launch the raid, you'll enter Oryx's ship, and will be faced with the opening encounter. In this encounter, you can die and respawn yourself, so it's pretty straightforward. The goal here is to open the portal that's far ahead past the hallway with the statues to continue on into the raid. In order to do this, you'll be collecting taken orbs and depositing them into big statues in the hallway in their center area. There are 6 statues that you will need to deposit orbs into. Now there is no boss or champions here, so spec yourself out in whatever weapons or subclasses you prefer to just clear ads. Roaming supers are usually pretty good, as well as pretty much any weapon. To start, split your teams up with 2 people on the left side, 2 people on the right side, and 2 people in the middle. The left and right teams will be the orb collecting teams on each side, while the 2 people in the middle will be assisting with ad clearing and open and taken barriers. The main mechanic of this encounter is that there will always be 2 orbs to collect and to deposit in each round. Both orbs need to be deposited at the statues in the middle, essentially together, as once you pick up an orb, you can only hold it for a short period of time. So to start, have 2 players grab the 2 orbs above the pillars in the middle and run them to the middle and deposit them in the statue together. Then, split off to your respective sides and head through the hallways to go find the next orb. After each deposit, the taken orb will always spawn a little further away. Once you locate your orb, coordinate with the player on the other side to pick up about the same time, and then start heading back to the center area to dunk them. Now when you do this, enemies will spawn in and try to stop you, as well as some big taken barrier walls. This is why you bring a second player with you, to help clear out the enemies and to shoot the taken wall to break it down. The players in the middle can also help float to break down the taken walls, as well as clear any extra ads. The orb runners should beeline it back to the entrance and dunk the orbs together. Look for the statue with the small taken circle under it for the one to deposit, but it's fairly obvious. Then just rinse and repeat, each time going further away to get the next orb. Note that every time a relic respawns, a timer will start. So, you need to be quick in picking up the relics each time, because the longer you wait to pick up the relics, the less time you'll have to run them back to the middle. If you don't make it back to the statue in time, the orb will disappear and you'll need to go back and try again. Once you deposit all the orbs into the statues, you can push forward into the open room, clear the final ads, and the portal will open to allow you to collect your loot and move on. However, if you plan on doing the entire raid start to finish, you can unlock the option for an extra red border deep sight raid weapon at the very end by shooting secret hive runes throughout the raid. If you want to do this, go under the platform where the portal is before going through it, and you'll see these 3 hive symbol runes. Jot them down, and you'll need to shoot the corresponding runes throughout the raid. I will provide a link in the description with all 9 rune locations so you can find them. If you don't want the extra chest at the end, you don't need to do this if you don't want. Now, head through the portal, collect the loot chest, and move forward to the next encounter, which is the first major jumping puzzle of the raid. If you want some extra help here, toss on a sword, lion rampants, stompies, Icarus dash, or whatever, because you're going to be doing a lot of jumping. If you did this in Destiny 1, it is exactly the same. For those new to this part, I will show you on screen the pattern of the ships to jump on. It may take you a few tries, but the pattern is always the same once you memorize it. Note, about halfway, you'll jump off one of the ships onto a stationary platform on the left before continuing. If you do this, it will act as a checkpoint if you fall to your death later on in the puzzle, so you won't spawn all the way back at the entrance. Once you make it across the chasm, you'll have one more tomb ship to take across, but there will be a barrier wall preventing you from going through the opening. To open this, you'll need 2 players to stay behind and stand on the 2 big plates on the left and right side of the tomb ship. This will unlock the barrier. The other 4 players can jump on the ship and take it across. However, you might want to grab the first secret chest of the raid, which is right in this area. As you take this ship across, jump off to the left as shown and carefully scale up the wall to this opening. If the 2 players are still on the plates, the door will open and reveal a chest on the other side. Then, those 4 players will continue down, kill the Shrieker and adds, and step on the plates that are on that side, which will allow the 2 stragglers to get off their plates, jump on the ship, and come across, grabbing the chest as well if they want. Once everyone is across, head up to the left and push forward into the next encounter area. Totems. For the Totems encounter, there is no boss, so you don't need to spec yourself out for maximizing damage. Instead, you'll want your best survivability loadout and ad clearing. Xenophage is a great option that has lots of ammo to take out majors quickly, but you could also use rockets, snipers, other heavy machine guns, or even shotguns. You want at least one weapon with some range to take out the enemies that will be high up on a ledge as the encounter goes on. For subclasses, nothing special is required either. Roaming supers are nice for clearing enemies, but Well and Bubble can also be handy if you're struggling to stay alive on plates. Finally, there are also some unstoppable ogres that will spawn in the middle during this fight, so make sure at least a handful of players have this mod on to help stun them and take them out. Now, the goal here is to unlock the big door in the center of the room. To do this, you're going to need to deposit a buff called Deathsinger's Power into the big plate on the floor in the middle. As you deposit more and more Deathsinger's Power, the hive rooms next to the door will start to fill up towards the top, and once you've deposited enough, all the rooms will light up and the door will open. Now, the main issue, however, is the 2 Annihilator totems that are in the caves in the far left and far right of the area. The entire encounter, you always have to have one standing on these totems at all times. If not, they will start to glow red and wipe the entire raid. And, complicating things even more, the caves the totems are in have a taken mist in them which will damage you as you stand in it. So how are you going to do this? First, split your team up into a left team and right team, each containing 3 players. Each team of 3 will operate independently throughout the encounter, but basically doing the same thing on each side. There are 2 main buffs that you'll basically be juggling in a Destiny version of Hot Potato. The Aura buff, which is called the Brand of the Weaver or Unraveler, and the Brand Claimer buff. To start, 1 player from each team will grab the Taken Orb, which is down near the cave on each side, which gives you a special aura preventing you from getting harmed by the mist. This will allow that player to stand on the Annihilator totem. The other players will stay up at the entrance and clear the adds. Now, the 2 players who ran down into the caves with the aura buff will stay next to the totem, clearing as many adds as possible, watching out for boomers that spawn up on the ledge above you. Every enemy you kill while holding the aura buff will give you 1 stack of Deathsinger's Power. That, remember, is what you're trying to collect and deposit into the big plate in the middle to progress the encounter. So the more you kill while you're holding the aura buff, the more Deathsinger's Power you'll gain. The players at the entrance will then start the main rotation. On the left and right ledges, a solar shielded wizard will spawn, and when it dies, it will spawn a special Taken Knight. Burn this knight quickly because he will drop the brand claimer buff on the platform. One player on each team, left and right, will need to pick up their brand claimer buffs and then run down into the cave on their side to the player standing on the totem. This is important because the player who is holding the aura buff that's standing on the totem can only hold it for about 30 seconds, and when their timer reaches 0, they'll die. And if they die, they also lose all their Death Stinger's power they collected. So if you're the person killing the knight, you'll need to quickly head down with the brand claimer and stand with the player on the totem and have them communicate when their timer is down to 2 to 3 seconds. At this point, the player that came down can steal the aura buff, which allows the player who is holding down the totem and collecting Death Stinger's power to run back up out of the cave and go stand on the big plate in the middle to get rid of it. You have to stay on the plate long enough to make sure all your Death Stinger's power is gone. While you're standing on the plate, you can also clear ads, especially focusing on the sword knights that will try to run down into the caves. While this is going on, the third player on each side will be up on the ledge killing their wizard and knight, picking up the brand claimer buff and heading down to the cave to repeat the buff swapping process. Then you'll just continue this rotation in a team of 3 on both sides. One player will always be on the totem with the aura, one player will be killing the wizard and the knight to come down and steal the aura, and the third player will be standing on the big plate to get rid of their Death Stinger's power and helping clear ads. Repeat this until the door unlocks and you can see the tooltip on the screen the Warpriest deems you worthy. A few final notes about this encounter. First, if you ever die with the brand aura buff, it'll respawn back at the cave entrance where someone will have to pick it back up and sprint back to the totem to prevent the totem from wiping you. Secondly, it's important to note that if you're on your totem defending and killing enemies, you can get off the totem briefly if you need to stay alive. Just make sure you get back on it when it turns red after a few seconds. Finally, make sure if you're in the middle depositing your Death Stinger's power, you get rid of it all before you jump up to kill your wizard and the knight, because you cannot pick up the brand claimer buff from the knight if you still have Death Stinger's power. Once the Warpriest deems you worthy, a chest will spawn in the middle, and you can move on to the first major boss for King's Fall, Warpriest. To prepare for the Warpriest, you'll want to equip your best boss damage weapons possible. Linear fusion rifles, especially with firing line or Vorpal, are great options, as well as having a decent sniper rifle or something like Witherhoard or Izanagi's Burden. It's best that one player uses Divinity for a crit spot and the debuff if possible. For primary weapons, having a solar-based weapon isn't a bad idea for the yellow bar solar wizards that will spawn, but you can really choose whatever you want. For subclasses, you'll want 1 or even 2 warlocks on Well of Radiance for the damage phase, or maybe a Titan bubble for the weapon buff. Everyone else should be on damage-based supers like Blade Barrage, Gathering Storm for Hunter, or Nova Bomb and Chaos Reach for warlocks. For Titans, Thunder Crash is actually not an option here because you can't damage the boss unless you're standing near a buffed player, which I'll cover in a minute. The goal is to kill the Warpriest, obviously. And, to prepare, you'll want to split your team up into 3 pairs. One team will start up on the left ledge, one team will stay middle, and one team will go to the right. In addition, to keep things organized, I think it's easiest to pre-assign 2 players as the brand stealers ahead of time, as they'll have an important job to do during the damage phase. To start the fight, have one player stand on each of the 3 plates, left, middle, and right. The Warpriest spawns in along with waves of acolytes, knights, and solar wizards. Work together to keep taking them out, and eventually you'll hear a loud roar and 3 more knights will spawn in each area. Once all 3 knights are dead, you will trigger the DPS phase of the fight. You'll see a tooltip on screen that says Glyph Sequence Started. To trigger the DPS phase, you have to stand on all 3 plates, but in a specific order. At this point, one of the 2 players that are in the middle will need to step on the middle plate and then look up at the large floating rock pillars on the left and right sides. Note that the middle plate also has a rock pillar in front of it. To figure out which is the first plate in the sequence of the 3 floating rock pillars, you'll see that one of them will start to glow. The player standing on the middle plate will check left and right to see which one is glowing. If either of these is glowing, call out left is first or right is first. And if neither plate is glowing, then by process of elimination, you know that middle is actually the first plate. Now that you know which plate is first, the middle player will get off of their plate, and then whoever's plate is first will get back on their plate. If the middle plate is the first one, the player that called while they were standing on the plate has to get off of it first and then can just get right back on. Now, this is the first plate activated. Now, after the player has activated the first plate, they will need to call out which plate is second. They will again look at the 2 remaining rock pillars for the glowing one and call it out. A player in that section stands on the second plate. And then by process of elimination, you'll know where the third plate is, and someone can hop on to finish the sequence. This sounds a little confusing, and it kind of is at first, but it's really quite simple once you figure out and understand what's going on. It's important to note a few things that need to happen once that third plate is stepped on, because the damage phase will start immediately. First, it's very important that the 2 players that you designated as the brand stealers do not activate the final plate in the 3-plate sequence. Secondly, whoever does stand on the last plate in the 3-plate sequence will start the damage phase and be given a Brand of the Weaver aura. This bright red aura is what will allow you to damage the Warpriest. If you're not standing in the red aura, you can't damage him. So as soon as that third plate is activated and the red aura is claimed, everyone should group up together at a pre-designated spot and start damaging the boss. You can damage the boss from anywhere in the room, so you should communicate this as you're doing the 3-plate sequence so that everyone will know where to meet up quickly. Drop wells, bubbles, and start burning your heavy and supers to damage the Warpriest as fast as possible. Now, while you are damaging the boss, the person who is holding the red aura buff will have 3 charges or stacks of the buff, along with a timer. If the timer reaches 0 and you have more than 1 stack of the buff left, the buff holder will die, and the damage phase will end. So you want to use all 3 charges to extend the damage phase as long as possible and to keep the buff holding players alive. This is where the 2 brand stealer players come into play. As soon as the damage phase starts, a yellow bar taken knight will spawn near one of the 3 plates, and it's random. Keep in mind, he will not spawn next to the plate that was third and activated the damage phase. One of the brand stealer players needs to hunt him down very quickly, kill him, and collect the brand stealer buff, and then beeline it to the group. This is because they need to steal the red aura buff from the player currently holding it before their timer reaches 0. When they do this, 1 stack will be consumed, but now this new player will have a fresh timer. Then, the second brand stealing player needs to go find a second taken knight that will spawn in one of the 3 plates as well. Note that this knight will never spawn at the same plate twice. They will also burn down this second knight, collect the buff, and then run to the group to claim the red aura buff a second time, continuing the DPS phase even longer. The other 4 players not in the brand stealing knight hunting duty will stay in the aura the whole time damaging the boss. Each time the brand is stolen and swapped to a new player, the timer resets, but it is a little less each time. Once the final stack of the aura buff is consumed, the player holding it won't die, but the damage phase will end. Very important now is as the damage phase ends, the Warpriest will call upon his Oculus and try to kill the entire raid party. The room will glow white, and the entire team will need to hide behind one of those 3 big stone pillars in the room because it will provide a shadow to prevent you from dying. Once this is done, the pillar will be destroyed and consumed, and you go back to the ad clearing phase and repeat everything again. It's important to know which pillar is taken, because on the next round of damage, you'll likely want to pick a different spot to damage from. You don't have much time from when the timer is up on the last stack of the buff until the room glows white and you have to hide. So if you're damaging in an area that doesn't have a pillar to hide behind, you'll want to make sure you get to a safe spot 3 to 5 seconds before the timer is over. Since there are 3 pillars that can save you from this attack, you get a maximum of 4 damage phases to kill him. A few final tips on this encounter if you're struggling. First, The glyph sequence for starting the damage phase doesn't start until all 3 sword knights are dead. So if people are low on ammo, you can leave one alive for a little while people scour the room for heavy and special ammo. Eventually, it will just start the glyphs on its own, but it's a pretty considerate amount of time. Secondly, this is very helpful as the fight progresses because you'll notice eventually, instead of hive enemies, you'll get taken enemies, and the knights that trigger the glyph sequence will be taken and spawn in faster. You can utilize this strategy to slow things down a little bit. Another tip is to have the first player designated as the brand-stealing night hunting player during the damage phase to be on the upper left side of the room. This is because it's up high and it's hard to jump up to. This way they can see the entire room and see where the first knight is and get to it very quickly. Finally, you'll notice that during the damage phase, the Warpriest will move around and inconveniently hide behind cover based on where you're damaging from. Keep this in mind when choosing your spots. I recommend either a spot that has little places for him to hide behind, or even up on the stage far enough away from him to avoid his ground slam. As I mentioned earlier, wherever you damage, just make sure you book it to behind one of the remaining pillars before the buff timer reaches 0 so he doesn't wipe you. With enough practice on the mechanics, you'll knock him down and collect your loot, and move on. The next area is a series of dark hallways on your way to the next boss room. You can follow the path on screen to reach the next boss. If you want, there is also a secret chest here you can get. There are 5 plates hidden in the dark maze as shown. Have the 5 players all find their plates and jump on them in the numbered order shown. If done correctly, you will hear a large door open and you can claim the chest in the middle as shown on the map. Then, you can progress north up to Golgoroth's door and enter the next boss fight. You're going to want to spec yourself out similarly as you did to the Warpriest encounter. A few Warlocks on Well of Radiance or Titans with Bubble for a damage buff, and everyone else on damaging supers. For weapons, stacking a good damage weapon like linear fusions with a secondary sniper or even shotgun, since you'll be able to damage him relatively closely. Izanagi is great to pair with any auto-loading heavy weapon too. Before the fight starts, you want to designate 2 players to be on Golgoroth's gaze duty, and these players will likely want some kind of auto rifle, SMG, or heavy machine gun to deal with the Axion bolts that Golgoroth will shoot at them. Also, balance the groups that you have 3 players on each side that will clear adds on the left and 3 on the right. To start the fight, shoot the big booger on the ceiling to spawn in the boss. Then, waves of adds will spawn in the side doors and the far back doors. Work together on each side to clear out everything, including a yellow bar wizard in the far back of the room. When all the adds are dead, you'll be ready to trigger the damage phase of the fight. There are 2 main mechanics during the damage phase. First, in order to actually damage him, you have to open up his chest by acquiring his gaze. To do this, his back will have a light brown spot on it that you can shoot. When you do this, he will turn and focus his attention on whoever shot it, and he will open up his belly for everyone else to damage him. Obviously, to acquire his gaze, you have to get behind him to shoot, but then you want him to turn around so his belly is facing the other players who are going to damage him. So once you get his gaze, you'll have about a 15-second timer to keep his belly open. Pay attention to the Axion bolts he'll shoot at you that can be very deadly. Now, importantly, you need to extend the damage timer past this 15 seconds by having a second player steal the gaze from the first player. To do this, have that second player rotate around behind Golgoroth and then shoot his back just like the first player did. With enough damage, the second player will now get his attention and will again need to turn Golgoroth back to facing the players who are damaging him. Make sure you do this before the first player's timer reaches 0 to extend the damage phase. You will then just keep repeating this process. One player steals the gaze, turns him to face the damage group, counts down their timer, while the other player gets behind him to get ready to steal it back. Then, turn him to face the damage group, count down their timer, and so on. You'll want to do this for a total of 6 gazes. This is important because there is a big totem of ruin with hive symbols on it in the middle of the pit, and for every time you miss taking his gaze, it'll fill up this totem. If you miss taking too many of his gazes, the totem will fill up and you will wipe. Now, there is a lot more to the damage phase, unfortunately, than just shooting the gaze back and forth so that people can shoot him in his belly. The entire time the two players rotating the gaze are doing so, the 4 remaining players will need to be maximizing their damage. Just shooting his belly doesn't do a whole lot. Instead, you need to look up on the ceiling for a newly spawned globe and shoot it down. It's best to start shooting this down before the first player acquires Golgoroth's gaze. When it hits the ground in the pit, it will spawn a pool of reclaimed light that you can stand in, and it will buff your damage to Golgoroth by about 10-fold. Drop a Well of Radiance or a Healing Empowering Rift or whatever you need and start damaging him. You may need to slightly orient yourself, as remember the player taking his gaze is going to try to rotate him to face you. Very, very, very importantly, everyone in the pit needs to pay attention to their screen for a debuff called Unstable Light. If this debuff pops up on your screen, your view will start to turn green and you'll become a ticking time bomb. If you randomly get this debuff, get away from your team. If you don't, you'll kill anyone that's next to you, and you'll be left standing for everyone to yell at you for not paying attention. Now, the safest things to do is just jump out of the pit until the timer reaches 0, the debuff goes away, and then you can join your team again. However, if you really want to do massive amounts of damage to Golgoroth, you actually want to run up underneath him and use the explosion from this unstable light to do massive amounts of damage. At this point, the pool of reclaimed light the damaging players are standing in will have a timer that will eventually reach 0 and the pool will disappear. Thankfully, a new orb will spawn up on the ceiling that needs to be quickly shot down, and everyone will move to that new pool of light on the ground to keep damaging. Very important that the gaze-stealing players pay attention to where the damaging team is standing in the pit so that they can turn Golgoroth to face that direction so they can see his belly. Keep repeating this process until the gaze has been stolen the maximum 6 times, and the damage phase will end when it says Golgoroth tires. At this point, jump out of the pit, go back to clearing ads, and repeat. Eventually, the hive enemies will stop spawning, and taken enemies will spawn in more regularly. However, doing damage is really no different. That's essentially the whole fight. Clearing ads, then setting up the damage sequence with 2 players rotating Golgoroth's attention via shooting his back and rotating him, and then the other 4 players dealing damage from the pools they shot on the ground, and paying attention to get out if you have the unstable light debuff. If you drop his health down to 0 without missing too many gaze swaps and filling up the Totem of Ruin, he will die and you will be rewarded with your chest of loot and can continue on. You'll enter the next jumping puzzle of the raid, which is home to another secret chest. You'll navigate your way down, avoiding the thrusting fallacies that launch you to your death. When you reach this spot, you can jump across and follow the path on screen to the chest. Watch out for the snipers and ads that are across the chasm that weren't there in Destiny 1. Then, you can either creatively sword fly across up from where the chest is to the other side, or spawn the platforms using these plates. If you have one player stand on all 3 plates, The hitting platforms will lock in permanently, allowing everyone to cross. Then, make your way up until you reach the area where you can jump up to enter the final arena space and face the first of 2 encounters, the Daughters of Oryx. To prepare, for weapons you'll want either rockets or linear fusions. Rockets seem to be the best strat so far in early clears of this raid. 1 player on Galahorn, 1 player on Divinity, and everyone else on a legendary rocket, Hothead, etc. Wardcliff Coil is also a pretty good option too. Otherwise, remaining weapons should be focused on clearing waves of taken enemies that spawn relentlessly throughout the fight. For supers, it's really best to have just a Warlock with Lunafaction boots on a well or a rift, and everyone else can be on whatever supers they want. The Daughters don't really have that much health, so you don't really need to stack damage supers like you do for Golgoroth and the Warpriest, but you can if you want. The goal of the fight is to basically just kill both Daughters. To do so, you will need to steal the brand from them that makes them immune so that you can damage them, one at a time. This fight is also sectioned into 2-minute blocks, which you'll need to do this, otherwise you will wipe. To prepare, we assigned 4 players to each of the 4 plates around the room. Front left, front right, back left, and back right. Then, the other 2 players will be floaters. The fight has 2 phases, the brand stealing part and the damage phase. The brand stealing part is the more difficult of the 2 for sure. To do this, you need to collect the Blight Guard objects that spawn up in the air and can only be reached by hidden plates. 3 of them to be specific. Once you climb the hidden platforms for a 3rd time and collect the 3rd Blight Guard object at the top, you can then use it to jump down and steal the brand from the daughter who is shooting at you, aka the one that's not in the green fire, in order to make her damageable. So, as soon as the fight begins, adds will spawn in and a knight will be standing on one of the 4 plates. Kill the knight, and then the plate will glow green. And this plate will be the first plate that will need to be activated by jumping on it. To spawn the hidden platforms, 2 specific plates always need to be jumped on, the first being the plate that had the knight on it. When the first plate is activated, randomly 1 player will turn taken and be torn between the taken dimension and see in black and white. This is the player that has to jump up on the platforms and claim the object at the top. So, whichever plate had the knight, the player designated for that plate will jump up on it. If the player responsible for that plate is actually torn between dimensions, they'll need to shout out for one of the floaters to grab it. Once they jump on their plate, they will then be able to look up in the air above one of the other 3 plates for the objective. Whichever plate this objective is above is the second plate that needs to be jumped on. Once the second plate is activated, the hidden platforms will spawn, and this will allow the taken player to jump up and claim the object at the top. It's important that the 2 players on the plates do not get off until the runner has reached the object, otherwise the plates will despawn. Once the runner has interacted with the object, they will call it out so everyone can get off their plates. Then, a new knight will spawn, indicating where the next first plate is, a new player will become taken runner, and then when they jump on the plate where the knight was, they'll call out the location of the second plate so they can spawn the platforms and jump up to the object. As I mentioned, you'll repeat this a total of 3 times, with the first 2 runners reaching the top, not actually picking anything up, but the 3rd runner will actually need to pick up and grab the final object. Once that 3rd buff has been grabbed, it'll be ready to start the damage phase. Everyone will group up together in a pre-assigned spot for damage. I prefer the little ledges under the Daughter's platforms. Be sure to set up to damage the one that is shooting the arc bolts and not the one with the green fire. The player that grabbed the 3rd object at the top of the platforms will jump down to the Daughter who is moving around and shooting, and use that object to interact and steal the brand of immortality from her. This will give you a white aura around you that makes the Daughter damageable. Meet your team in that pre-designated spot and unleash hell. It's important to note that the aura will make you invulnerable during damage, so you don't need a well or a healing rift unless you're using Lunafaction boots for a faster reload time. Using heavy supers whatever you can is do as much damage as possible. Pay close attention to the timer on your screen that started at 2 minutes when the plate part was going on. When this timer reaches 0, the Daughters will unleash an attack that will kill anyone not standing in the aura. So essentially, the faster you do the plate and running phase, the more time you'll have to damage the daughters. After damage and the wipe mechanic, a new timer will start, and you'll return to the plate and running sequence again, having to do 3 more jumping sequences to steal the brand again, and then damage the other daughter. In normal mode, killing each of the daughters in one phase is pretty straightforward. But it's important to note that daughters have to be killed back to back. So if for some reason your team can't kill one in one phase, make sure you're rotating damaging them back and forth until you can finish them both off in back-to-back phases. If you kill one but don't kill the other one in the next phase, you will get wiped. Repeat the process of running and collecting the brand and then damage until you've killed them both. Now, you will be ready to take on Oryx, the Taken King. Oryx is back with a vengeance, and this time, the fight is much more exciting than it was 7 years ago. In preparation for this fight, you'll again want some form of damage buffing via Well of Radiance or Bubble. Having the Well Warlock on Lunafaction boots is also nice to speed up reloads. Everyone else can be on damage supers if you want to be able to damage him from a distance. These things like Blade Barrage, Gathering Storm, and Nova Bomb. In addition, I found having a Stasis Warlock or two for having turrets to toss around and freeze knights and ogres is also kind of helpful, but not required. For weapons, again, stack those meta DPS weapons like linear fusions or rockets with auto-loading holster. Sniper rifles, Izanagi's Burden, or an Arbalest are also great options for the top slot in addition to a good heavy weapon. Also make sure you have reserve mods and ammo finder on for your weapon, because having enough ammo can be an issue when you get close to the end of the fight. To prepare, you'll want to essentially set up just like you did for Daughters, because the first half of each phase is essentially the exact same it was for the previous encounter. Designate 4 people to be responsible for each plate area. Front left, front right, back left, and back right. However, now for the Oryx encounter, not only will they be responsible for that plate, but they'll also be responsible for their own ogre, their own Light Eater Knight, and their own Taken Bomb. I'll cover what each of those are shortly. Then you'll have the same 2 floaters. These players will take over any of the 4 plates if the person designated for that plate becomes taken and torn between dimensions and has to run up on platforms. The fight is broken up into 2 main phases, running phase and damage phase. After 1 full cycle of a running phase and damage phase, there will also be an intermediate phase that happens before you return to the running and damage phases again. I'll cover each one separately. First, the running phase. This is literally exactly the same as Daughters. Oryx will move about to one of the 4 plates and slam his fist on it. Once he does, the plate will go green. Whichever plate he slams is the first plate in the running sequence. Remember, there are 3 total running sequences per round. The player for whichever plate Oryx slams at will jump up on it. Don't go too early or it will light on fire. When they do this, one player will randomly get taken and will call out for a floater to cover their plate if necessary. The taken player will join the player on the first place and look up for whichever plate now has an objective above it again. Because whichever plate has that objective above it is the second plate that needs activated in order to spawn the platforms for the runner to jump on. Once both plates are activated and stood on, the runner can then go up and collect the Blight Guard piece. If you are the runner, be sure to shout out when you've reached the top and interacted with the objective so the 2 players can get off their plates. Now, very important is that during this first running sequence, yellow bar ogres will spawn in front of each of the 4 plates. The person assigned to each area needs to burn these ogres down quickly. And when dead, they will leave behind a taken blight that you need to stay away from, for now. Then, also when the ogre dies, behind the plate will be a yellow bar Light Eater Knight that will spawn. This also needs to be taken out quickly because they will make a beeline for the blights and try to consume them. And if you lose any of the blights left behind from the ogres, then the less damage you can do to Oryx. So essentially, kill all 4 ogres, which will drop 4 taken blights in each quadrant, and then kill the 4 Light Eater Knights to prevent them from eating the taken blights. Once the first runner has grabbed the objective, and the 4 ogres and the 4 knights are all dead, you then want to repeat the running phase 2 more times. Each time, Oryx won't necessarily move, so the only way to know which plate is first now is to look for the one that is glowing with green fire on it. That will always be plate number 1, and the second plate will always be called out by the taken runner or player who jumped on the first plate. Now in the third running phase, just like Daughters, the taken runner will actually pick up the buff at the top of the platforms. While they are doing this, a big orange bar knight called the Vessel of Oryx will spawn in with a big white aura around him. The player who was the runner will go up to the vessel and steal the aura of immortality from him, and then work on killing him. Once you claim this aura, you are invulnerable, and anyone standing near you is as well. At this point, we'll finally move into beginning of the damage phase. Oryx will slam his fist again in the same spot, and then you will see a tooltip on screen that Oryx has called upon the darkness. At this point, very quickly, all 4 players from each quadrant need to run into the blights dropped by the ogres and stand inside them for 3 seconds to detonate them. You want all 4 players to do this fast, but at the same time, so it's best to do a quick countdown 3, 2, 1, step in your blights, and as soon as the blights detonate, you'll see your name pop up on screen and you can sprint back to the aura holder. You need to do this sprint quickly because their explosion will kill you if you're not fast enough. It's best for the person holding the aura to be right in the middle. That way all 4 players have the same distance to travel back. Once the bombs detonate, it will finally stun Oryx and you'll be able to damage him. Toss a divinity on him if you want, drop a bubble or a well for a damage buff, and the more blights you detonated, the more damage you can do. So it's best to have 4 blights. Once you've damaged him long enough, his chest will close up and he'll go back to the front of the arena. Now, this was one full running and damage cycle. As I mentioned at the beginning, between each running and damage cycle will be an intermediate phase. One of 2 things will happen, and it's RNG on which, so pay close attention to what Oryx does. The first thing he can do is the meteors phase. He will actually push away from the ship and start raining down meteors from the sky to try and kill you. As soon as you see him push away from the ship, call out meteors and start sprinting, and do not stop moving. If you stop moving or get close to someone else, the meteors will lock onto you and kill you. Keep running without stopping until he comes back and stops summoning them. The other thing he can do, instead of the meteors, is the shade phase. Instead of pushing away, he will push forward and summon a large taken blight at the front of the arena. Stay away from this blight as it will kill you if you touch it. Everyone should head to the front of the arena and start killing the thrall that spawn on the left and right sides of this big blight, so you can prevent them from getting inside. Then, one at a time, Oryx will summon players into this bubble to fight a mini Oryx. He will be hiding in the shadows just outside of the bubble and is very hard to see as he teleports around. Use whatever you can to take him down quickly. Every so often, he'll come into the bubble with his big cleaver and try to take you out. If you don't take him out fast enough, you will wipe. Once the shade dies, you'll all get teleported back out into the main arena. Now, after either of these options happens, as the intermediate phase, Oryx will then move about to a new plate, slam his fists, and you will go right back into the running phase again, followed by another damage phase. You will keep repeating this process until you get Oryx's health down to the marking on his health bar, which is at about 20% or so. At this point, you'll trigger his final stand, and it's a little different than Destiny 1. This time, 2 final ogres will spawn on the front left and front right side plates. Kill them both as they spawn, and then send one player to go detonate one of the bombs to stun Oryx the moment he summons the darkness. Then have that player run back to the aura, and everyone will damage Oryx as much as possible. You can then send a second player to go detonate the second bomb to stun him again if you're struggling with ammo to finish him off. Either way, this is the final stand. Damage him to 0 or wipe. If successful, you'll be rewarded with your loot and have a second chest if you manage to shoot all the correct symbols throughout the raid, as I mentioned at the beginning. Best of luck in your endeavors on the Dreadnought. If you found this video helpful or you learned anything at all, please let me know by liking the video and hitting the subscribe button to get connected to the channel and stay up to date on your Destiny 2 raid needs. Thanks for watching, Guardians, and we'll see you next time.